Hey, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Christian Business Advantage podcast. I am your host, Alyssa Avant, and today we are continuing our series for the month of July on the mid-year business reset. Today, we're going to talk about your second half success plan and why I'm planning the rest of my year in two 12-week sections. So you might remember that in episode 266, when we started off this month, we talked about the mid-year check-in, looking back before moving forward. And last week, we talked about the power of letting go. 5 things you might need to stop doing in your business. So if you have not listened to those episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen. And now it's time to decide what we're intentionally going to focus on moving forward. And when you look at 6 months being ahead in your business, that can be a little bit overwhelming, and it can be incredibly productive when broken down into manageable seasons. So that's why today I want to share with you a planning method that's transformed the way that I run my business. And it's called the 12-week year. And it's something that I have personally done for years. If you think about it, if you set New Year's goals every year, January can feel very exciting, but by March, you've lost your momentum. And by July, which is where we're at now, you will often feel guilty and just give up. So I still set annual vision goals, but I don't manage my business by annual goals anymore. I manage it by 12-week cycles. When you're managing it by 12 weeks, it helps to increase that urgency that you feel without becoming overwhelmed. It's also more manageable because you can break it into action steps, which is what the 12-week year teaches. And if you get an accountability partner like I do, you can help each other to stay accountable for the goals and to even encourage each other to keep going. So this is why 6 months equals 2 opportunities. Instead of saying, I have 6 months left, you can think, I have 2 complete 12-week sections remaining or 12-week sets remaining. And that mindset can change everything for you. So you get 2 planning sessions, 2 executive seasons, and 2 opportunities to course correct, to get right back on track, 2 opportunities to celebrate your wins. And you don't have 6 months left. You have 2 fresh starts, because when you set your 12-week goals, if you don't achieve something that you want to, you have a fresh start 12 weeks later. If you are trying to focus in on something, so maybe you decided after listening to the last episode on focus and the power of letting go, that maybe you decided, okay, I'm going to focus on one strategy or one goal. So we talked about maybe that being grow your email list, finishing a manuscript, launching a course, booking speaking engagements, whatever the case may be. Then you are going to focus in on that. And honestly, fewer goals usually equal better results. So you build out your weekly action steps. That's why the 12-week year works so well. So instead of asking yourself, what do I want to do by the end of this year? What must happen every week? So instead of saying, I want to have 500 new subscribers, you would break that down into a weekly action. So post 1 blog a week, send 1 email, create 3 social media posts, guest on 1 podcast each month, whatever the case may be. So if you remember last episode, I think it was, in one of the last episodes, I talked about how one of my coaches, Teresa Taylor, always talked about mastering the mundane. Success usually isn't about doing something extraordinary once. It's about faithfully doing the ordinary over and over again. And that is about building consistency into your business. So I track weekly commitments that I have. So for me, some of those are to stay on top of my budget, because it's really important for me to manage my money well in my business and personal. Another one is to send a weekly email I also put out a weekly podcast like you're listening to. And finally, I write daily because I am working on finishing a book. I'm actually just finished or really, really close to finishing writing chapter 15 of 17 chapters. So that was my goal for the last 12 weeks prior to this set. And I ended up having to have surgery during the middle of those 12 weeks, which meant that I took about a week or week and a half off. So this time I had to move that goal into the next 12 weeks. But by the end of July, I should finish the book, writing the book. So that is an example for you of if you don't get something done in the 12 weeks, that you can move it forward. But basically, what you do is you set weekly action steps or commitments that you're going to make. I write these in my planner, and my goal isn't just checking off random tasks, it's checking off tasks that actually move my business forward. So I can look back and I can say, did I send my weekly email? Did I record my episodes? Did I write this week? And consistency beats intensity every time. So it's not about doing more. Like I've said before, it is about doing what matters and mastering the mundane. And so think about this verse, which is Proverbs 16:3. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. Planning isn't unspiritual. Planning is stewardship. So we make plans while remaining open to God's direction. And so instead of creating 6 months of goals, I want to challenge you to spend 1 hour this week planning the next 12 weeks and asking yourself, what is your number one goal? What weekly actions support that goal? What distractions do you need to eliminate? And how will you measure progress? Will you write it down in your planner and check it off? And then remember, don't worry about finishing the entire year. Just faithfully steward the next 12 weeks, then do it again. So small, consistent steps taken over time often produce the biggest results. I have done episodes in the past that detail in more, that explain in more detail the 12-week year. If you'd like to go back and listen to those, I'm going to put the links, but also like the numbers of the podcast into the podcast notes or show notes so that you can go back and listen. And that way you can get a little bit more detail if you'd like, or you can check out the book, The 12-Week Year by Brian P. Moran. It is absolutely one of my favorites. And I thank you for listening to this week's episode.